It was a cool December evening in 1976 when 66-year-old Marjorie Wilson joined her husband and friends for a quiet dinner at the Lake Monroe Inn in Sanford, Florida. They had just been served their meals, but when Marjorie's shrimp arrived, she barely touched it. She leaned forward to her husband, Robert.
Robert, I don't feel well.
Concerned, Robert walked her to their car, a bright yellow 1973 Chevrolet Impala. He turned the heat on, tucked her inside. But when Robert came back, just 15 minutes later, his heart dropped. The car was gone, and so was Marjorie. At first, a small, rational voice told him she must have felt better, driven the car home. But that thought was drowned out by a growing dread. He had to wait more than an hour for a taxi. The silence of their Deltona home confirmed his worst fears. The house was dark. The Impala wasn't in the driveway. Marjorie would never be seen again, and neither would the Chevrolet. Investigators learned another vehicle in the inn's parking lot had been sideswiped that night, a small detail that pointed to a terrible possibility. Was this Marjorie, disoriented and sick? Her husband said no. She was a careful driver. If the Impala had been behind the wheel of destruction, then someone else must have been driving it. Theory swirled. The dark waters of Lake Monroe loomed nearby. The divers searched. The lake was too shallow to conceal such a car. No wreckage, no glass, no trace of Marjorie. Weeks earlier, in the very same parking lot, a hooded man had abducted two patrons at gunpoint, forcing them into their vehicles and robbing them. Could he, or someone like him, have been waiting in the shadows? But what we're left with is simply this. Marjorie Wilson vanished into a December night nearly half a century ago. A woman, a wife, a friend. Swallowed not by time, nor by the water, but by mystery itself. On June 26, 1977, on his 20th birthday, John Clifton Ballenger stepped into the glow of the Satellite Beach movie theater, ready for what should have been just an ordinary night. He was with friends, out on a double date. And like millions across America that summer, they were there to see Star Wars. For most of the evening, everything was normal. Partway through the movie, John excused himself. He slipped out of his seat, whispered something about the bathroom, and vanished into the shadows. He never returned, not to his family, not to his friends, not to his life. John was carrying only about $15 in his pocket that night. No car, no plan. Nothing to suggest he was ready to walk away forever. But his life, like so many young men of that era, it wasn't simple. He had been struggling, out of work, drinking a little too much, using some illicit substances. Shadows were gathering around him, and maybe they were closing in. Not long before his disappearance, two of John's closest friends had been badly beaten. They lived nearby, and whispers were suggesting that maybe they'd been caught up in the local drug trade. Whether that violence reached John or whether it merely circled around him like a storm he just couldn't escape, well, we may never know the answer to that one. Police found no proof of abduction, no signs of foul play. Some said maybe he chose to disappear. After all, when he was 16, John had run away for 3 weeks. He was found safe, but this time, this seemed so much different. This time, he never came back. What lingers is a cruel silence. A young man left his seat in a darkened movie theater and was swallowed whole by the night. 12 years later, the courts declared John Clifton Ballenger legally dead. But no grave has ever held him. No truth has ever surfaced. And somewhere between the Florida shoreline and the echo of the projector reel, the story remains unfinished, unsolved, and deeply haunting.
Welcome to BucklesBerry Lemonade. Tonight, unravel the mystery with us. A tale of sun and shadow, hope and heartbreak. We begin not in the past, but in the present, with a memory that refuses to fade.
Imagine a phone ringing in the night. Susan, Amy's mother, listens, holds her breath, the way she did for decades. Every ring could be Amy. Every ring could be a lie.
On March 5th, 1974, Amy went home for lunch and called her father, Ned, to borrow some money. Her plan was simple. Walk the less than a mile from her residence to Ned's art gallery on Commodore Plaza. She never made it.
Amy was wearing a short denim miniskirt and cork platform sandals. The time of her disappearance was midday, around 12 p.m. Witnesses, they offered conflicting reports, which is typical in chaos. One saw her enter a light-colored pickup truck. Another, they said a light-colored Jeep. And a third suggested a beige van. None of these leads amounted to anything concrete.
But the first true sign that this was not a simple runaway case was the immediate menace that followed. Within days, her family received an extortion call demanding $30,000.
That specific threat turned out to be a cruel hoax placed by 2 twin brothers, the Glassers. They were swiftly arrested, but this initial red herring, it only obscured the very real danger that Amy had encountered. 2 weeks after Amy vanished, a hitchhiking college student found a small personal item in the grass beside the Florida Turnpike, over 250 miles northwest of Miami. It was Amy's camera.
The camera contained a few underdeveloped photos, one of a light-colored pickup and another showing a white van. But the most chilling theory, one that Susan Billig, Amy's mother, would spend the rest of her life chasing, was the connection to a notorious motorcycle gang known as the Outlaws.
Police quickly learned a large contingent of outlaws had passed through Coconut Grove around the time that Amy disappeared. This theory gained horrific traction when Susan met 2 gang members who confessed that, yes, members of their organization routinely kidnapped young women, sometimes selling them for nothing more than a bike or a credit card.
Susan became an avenging force. She relentlessly pursued every single lead. In 1976, she met a biker named Dave, who claimed he had actually owned Amy at one point. He showed Susan a terrible validating clue. He described a hidden appendectomy scar on Amy's abdomen, a detail that the family had never released to the media.
He described Amy as quiet, almost mute. This detail became an identifier, followed by multiple witnesses in different states. But despite Dave's promises to lead Susan to Amy in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the meeting was a bust. It ended in a barroom fight and Dave vanishing.
Susan's search spanned 3 decades, stretching from Florida to Seattle, Washington. But the darkest, most horrifying piece of information surfaced years later, long after the supposed biker responsible, Paul Branch, had died in 1996.
Branch's common-law wife came forward with a deathbed confession. Branch was able to describe Amy's scar, confirming he knew her. But the rest of his revelation was brutal, terrifying. He claimed that Amy had been taken to a party and had become involved in an act of unspeakable group violence and forced intoxication.
The confession alleged that, in the frenzy, Amy became unresponsive. Branch's final words on the matter claimed that her body was disposed of in a way that ensured no trace would ever be found, swallowed by the wildest, most desolate part of Florida ecosystem. This account offered a gruesome closure, though one investigators were never able to definitively prove or disprove.
As if Susan Billig hadn't endured enough, she spent 21 years being tormented by an anonymous man who called her repeatedly, claiming her daughter was held against her will by an illicit ring. He was always elusive, always using payphones, until he made that one fatal mistake in 1995. He used a cell phone.
The number led police to a U.S. Customs agent named Henry Johnson Blair, the man who tormented Susan for 2 decades. He was arrested. Blair claimed he was merely an alcoholic with an obsessive-compulsive disorder and maintained he had no connection to Amy's disappearance. Wow.
But Susan, she was still searching for the truth. She found a chilling entry in Amy's old journal, written just 6 weeks before she vanished. Amy wrote,
Hank says, as soon as I finish school, he wants me to go to South America with him. I told him he's crazy.
Hank was Henry Blair's nickname. Blair was a sky marshal until 1973, and his customs job often involved patrolling local waterways and driving seized vehicles, including, according to his neighbors, a light-colored pickup truck and a beat-up beige van, matching those vague witness descriptions from 1974.
Blair was convicted of harassment and lost a civil suit, but he was never charged with Amy's kidnapping or murder. The ultimate irony of this case is that the 2 key individuals, the biker Paul Branch, the harasser Henry Blair, or Hank, both had access to information only an involved person would know: the scar, the nickname, travel details. Yet the definitive truth remains trapped in the silence of 1974.
Amy's parents, Ned and Susan, spent the rest of their lives searching. They passed away without ever knowing where Amy rests. Today, Amy Billig is remembered not just as a missing person, but as a victim whose promise was stolen and whose tragic story is a testament to a mother's relentless 31-year war for answers.
The year was 1981. The location was a lonely stretch of water in Moorhaven, Florida. It was here, on a bleak March day, that a body surfaced, face down in the canal. She was a ghost from the moment she was found, unrecognizable, unnamed. No missing person report matched her description. The local authorities, well, they had no choice. They buried her under an arbitrary marker, an alias that would serve as a name, but not a truth. Nicole Michelle Emmons. She was a Jane Doe, swallowed whole by the enmity of the water. But the story didn't begin by the canal. Her story begins 2 months earlier, 200 miles south in Miami, on Valentine's Day. 16-year-old Nicki Virginia Lee Elkins walked away from her family member's home. She carried a single suitcase, the kind a teenager packs when she's determined to make a point or to flee a place that no longer feels safe. She was searching for escape, but her steps that night led her right toward betrayal. The devastating silence in Nicki's case began immediately. She wasn't reported missing until April 16th, 2 long months after she had vanished. 2 critical months of lost leads, forgotten conversations, and cold trails. And tragically, 2 months after her body had already been found in that canal. The distance between the living who were searching and the dead who were waiting, well, that was immense. In the weeks leading up to her death, there were desperate whispers of her life, sightings of a girl matching her description at Uncle Joe's fish camp or a bar in Clewiston. A teenager far from home, living under a mysterious alias. Was she lured there? Was the name Nicole Michelle Emmons a shield she chose? Or a new identity forced upon her by someone who was trying to control her? Investigators, they also fielded rumors that she was seen in Naples before her body found its final, tragic resting place in that canal. Every clue was a frustrating dead end. Every sighting just a shadow. The truth of Nicki's short life was tangled with secrets way too complex for 1981 investigators to untangle. And so the shadows deepened. For nearly 4 decades, her mother lived without knowing where her daughter was, without the comfort of even a grave to visit. But thanks to modern forensic genealogy and DNA technology, well, that linked Jane Doe from that canal to the name Nicki Virginia Lee Elkins. And after 39 years, her identity, her dignity, they were restored. Her remains were given back to her family. But the story doesn't end with the name. Nicki's death remains unsolved. Someone out there knows what happened to her in those missing weeks in 1981. The arguments, the travel, the person she trusted enough to carry her away from Miami. Nicki wasn't just a Jane Doe. She was a daughter, a young woman who deserved more than silence and shadows. She deserved safety. She deserved a future. Her name is Nicki Virginia Lee Elkins, and the ending to her tragic, complex story still waits to be told.
Well, my darlings, we shall return after a brief message from our sponsor.
This is Lisa from BucklesBerry Lemonade. We're so glad you joined us. Please hit the like and subscribe button and comment where you're listening from.
We now join our regularly scheduled programming already in progress.
Florida has two kinds of missing people: the ones who vanish loudly and the ones who disappear so quietly the world doesn't even notice they're gone. Tonight, we're talking about the second kind. Two women, both long dead before anyone realized they were missing. Two cases separated by 15 years. One buried in a shallow grave in the woods. One sunk at the bottom of a backyard swimming pool. Each wrapped in layers of silence, half-truths, and people who fled just a little too quickly. This is the story of Jeana Burrus and the story of Cindy Rogers. Two names Florida forgot until their graves spoke louder than their lives were ever allowed to. In February of 2007, in a quiet corner of Sarasota known as Ashton Court, a landscaper noticed something strange in a patch of woods beside a row of tiny suburban homes. The soil looked disturbed, just a shallow patch of earth, barely a few inches deep. At first, he thought it might be an animal burial, perhaps a dog, maybe a raccoon or a cat. What he found instead were human bones, tangled in the kind of grave someone digs in a hurry. The sheriff's office collected what was left, much more than a skeleton, scraps of clothing, and silence. No purse, no ID, no witnesses, no missing persons reports that matched. And for 15 years, those remains sat in storage, labeled only as Unidentified Female, 2007. Detectives eventually learned through forensics that the woman had been in her late 30s. They estimated she died sometime between 2005 and 2007. But without DNA matches, the case just froze. What made it even worse was that this woman, whoever she was, seemed to belong to no one. No one had filed a report. No one had called police. No one had asked for her. It was as if she had lived and died completely invisible. Then in 2022, the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office partnered with DNA Labs International. They uploaded the woman's DNA into databases, hoping for some sort of match, a distant cousin, maybe a sibling, someone. What they got was a match, but not because anyone went looking for her. A relative's DNA had been collected in an entirely different investigation. Detectives have never released the relative's identity or the details of that case, only that a sample unexpectedly connected to their long-dead Jane Doe. As if a ghost was reaching out through someone else's tragedy. The remains were identified as Jeana Lynn Burrus, 39 years old, a mother of a son, a wife to a man named James Burrus. And here is where the entire case went from tragic to deeply suspicious. Detectives learned Jeana was last known to be alive around 2005 to 2006, living in a house on Tampa Road in Sarasota with her husband James and their small son. Jeana didn't drive. She didn't work. She relied completely on James. And yet, James never reported her missing. When investigators tracked down James, they found a man whose story changed every single time police spoke to him. At one point, James claimed Jeana just walked away. At another, he said he thought she had gone back to her family. And then, in a detail that truly chilled the detectives, Jeana's now grown son told officers he had spent most of his life believing his mother had abandoned the family. After all, that was the story his father had told him. Except Jeana hadn't walked away. She hadn't just gone home to family. She hadn't just started a new life. Jeana had been buried for years in the same county James had suddenly left right after she vanished. Detectives described James' movements as abrupt, not a normal move, not a job relocation. It was as if he was a man running, leaving Florida for California, and quickly leaving California for Maryland. He still lives to this day. Detectives also discovered that around the time James was in California, someone had placed a Crime Stopper tip in that area referencing Jeana's disappearance. This was well before anyone knew who the Ashton Court victim was. And when police asked James about it, he said he didn't remember. A convenient memory lapse. So here's what police believe today. They believe Jeana's death. It's officially a homicide. Her killer has never been charged. Her burial site suggests panic. Her missing person status never filed. Well, that suggests something worse. Intention. And the most haunting detail? For 15 years, Jeana Burrus lay hidden in those woods. Not because her killer was clever, but because nobody in her life even bothered to say she was gone. She was only found because of another case, someone else's tragedy, that forced a DNA sample into the system. Florida didn't find Jeana. Another ghost did. Now let's jump back to April the 7th, 1992. 15 years before Jeana's bones were discovered. Let's go to a little house on Gallup Avenue in Sarasota, Florida. It's a quiet street. A few palm trees, faded stucco walls. Houses are so close together that you can hear your neighbor sneeze through the fence. And in the backyard of one of them, a single-story home at 4580 Gallup Avenue. A plastic garbage can was floating gently in the swimming pool. Well, at first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Florida homes collect junk like tourists collect sunburns. But something about that trash can looked wrong. Heavy. Weighted. The lid, it was tied down. When the police were called and they opened it, a smell pushed out. It wasn't chlorine, wasn't decay, but something older, dry, settled rot. Death had been waiting a long time. Inside that garbage can was the body of Cindy Rogers. And Cindy had been dead for a year. Cindy Rogers was last seen in 1991, living at that very same house. According to her friends, she'd been in the process of moving out, packing, sorting, making plans. And then, just like that, she was gone. Now, people asked about her. People wondered where she went. But no one knew she was still there, in the backyard, in that swimming pool, sealed inside a plastic tomb. The most chilling part, medical examiners determined Cindy had been dead much longer than she had been in that pool. Meaning the killer had kept her body somewhere else for months, maybe even longer, before disposing of it in the most bizarre way imaginable. Why the pool? Why a trash can? Why now? Signs point to a killer who panicked late, not early. Neighbors told detectives the house always had people coming and going, tenants, visitors, arguments, slamming doors. Cindy was trying to leave that revolving door environment when she disappeared. And whoever killed her, they knew the house, knew the pool, knew the schedule, knew how to wait until the exact right moment to drag a long-dead woman onto that property, seal her inside a garbage can, and then drop her in the pool like a piece of unwanted furniture. Detectives believe that killer assumed the pool water would degrade the evidence or somehow hide the timeline. But instead, it told a much different story. Cindy was killed long before she was dumped. That meant the trash can, it wasn't the scene of the crime. It was the killer's last mistake. A body hidden in plain water. The image of that trash can quietly bumping against the pool wall, sunlight glittering on the water above a woman who'd been forgotten for a year. Well, it became one of Sarasota's darkest symbols. This wasn't just a murder. It was an erasure. Somebody wanted Cindy to disappear so completely that her body didn't even make it into the pool for an entire year. Cindy's case remains unsolved, but detectives believe the killer lived in that house or spent enough time there to hide Cindy's body until they were ready to move it. Someone on Gallup Avenue knows what happened. They knew in 1991. They knew in 1992. And the odds, well, the odds say they still know today. 2 women, 2 forgotten graves, one buried in the woods, her name silenced for 15 years. One hidden in a trash can, floating under the Florida sun. Both surrounded by people who either looked away or walked away at exactly the wrong time. Now, Florida doesn't forget easily, but sometimes it takes the dead speaking through bones, DNA, garbage bin tombs, to remind us who they are. Jeana Burrus, Cindy Rogers, two Florida ghosts, still waiting for the truth. But before we sign off tonight, won't you pour yourself one last glass of BucklesBerry Lemonade? And let's go down two more forgotten Florida roads where two young girls vanished and the truth still refuses to come home. And they want their stories told. In the dead still heat of a Florida autumn, where the palominos rattle like bones in a burlap sack, children once said you could still hear the soft clatter of a leash dragging somewhere in the woods of Tonatassa, Florida. A lonely sound, like something looking for someone who never came home. Her name was Gail Joiner, 13 years old. Hair sun-bleached thin as corn silk, with a furry friend perched on her shoulder that made folks stop and stare. Bandit, the pet raccoon. She loved more fiercely than most people love anything. And when she walked, he waddled. When she laughed, he chittered. They were a strange pair moving through a strange place. Florida back then wasn't just hot, it was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the emptiness between towns, by the woods that breathed, by the dirt roads that swallowed things whole. Gail had only been in that world for a few months before she disappeared, fresh out of Michigan, newly enrolled at the local junior high. She came home from school on September 22nd, 1972, ate her sandwich just like any other day, then set out barefoot to walk bandit along the familiar edge of woods behind her house. Now, neighbors later recall seeing her near a white car idling where the road met the tree line, but no one saw her get inside. No one saw her run. No one saw Bandit return. The sheriff's department, desperate for leads, they bought Gail's parents 17 raccoon carcasses, thinking just maybe Bandit had come to some terrible end and Mike could offer a clue. But Bandit, he had a burn on one paw and a scrape across his nose. Marks his family just couldn't forget. Not one of those bodies matched Bandit. Something else had taken him. Something else had taken Gail. Her parents believed someone had charmed their daughter by charming her raccoon. Kneeling down, praising the little creature, offering trust the way some people offer candy. Gail wasn't the type to wander. She wasn't the type to just run away. She was the type to show you her pet, smile shyly, then follow wherever kindness seemed to point. And that's often how evil walks in Florida. Soft-voiced, curious, gentle enough just to keep its teeth hidden. 3 years later, in 60 miles north, another girl vanished under the same Florida sun. Susan Basile, just 12 years old, rode the school bus home through Port Orange on June 10th, 1975. The kind of route where pine trees blur past the windows like dark green bars. Now, she usually walked with a friend, but that day she stepped off the bus alone, turning down a dirt road that locals said could feel a little too quiet at times. A witness later claimed they saw Susan being shoved into a dark blue Chevrolet van, the kind with orange curtains that looked like they belonged in a roadside carnival. 2 men, one barely out of boyhood, the other with the extra 10 years of shadow behind his eyes. The van had one word painted on it, Aries. Then, it was gone. And so was Susan. Her path home remained dusty and undisturbed, just as though she dissolved into thin air. For both Gail and Susan, rumors swirled like mosquitoes, thick, relentless, and impossible to kill. And floating somewhere among those rumors was the name of a man who liked to confess to things. Sometimes truthfully, sometimes not. A man who filled notebook pages with stories about girls he claimed to have taken. A man who found a sort of hideous fame in the darkness of his own making. But this story, it isn't about him. This story belongs to Gail and Susan. Because long before his name appeared in the newspapers, the woods were already whispering about Susan and Gail. Long before he led deputies to empty lots and overbuilt fields, mothers were already warning their daughters not to walk alone. And long before his execution in 1998, Florida had already learned a hard truth. Monsters don't create missing girls. Missing girls create monsters. Because we all need something to blame. There's an image that lingers in both cases, like a watermark left by grief on the pages of a memory. For Gail, a leash held loosely in her hand. A raccoon, a child whose joy could be stolen simply by someone pretending to admire it. For Susan, a road stretching ahead like a promise. The hum of a school bus pulling away. Silence that came too quickly. 2 girls walking home under the same burning sky, in different towns, in different years. 2 girls swallowed by the same kind of Florida wilderness. One leafy, one sandy, both being watched. The police searched. The parents begged, the towns whispered, and the Florida darkness with its swamps and sawgrass and heavy, suffocating air, it held its secrets close. Gail's siblings waited for word that never came. Susan's family walked the road where she'd vanished, looking for anything, a hair tie, a notebook, maybe a scrap of fabric. Something that would say she'd been real, that the world really hadn't lost her to a hole it could no longer find. Some nights they say the wind through the pine trees of Port Orange sounds like a girl calling for help. Some nights the rustling beside the Tanatase woods sounds like the soft steps of a raccoon trying to lead someone home. But these are the things that desperate hearts want to hear. The truth is simpler, sadder, and darker. Florida does remember it's missing. The land keeps their stories, even when people forget. And somewhere between these 2 lonely paths, with a raccoon leash dragging through the leaves, the other with footprints abruptly ending in dirt, lies the shadow of a question that Florida still cannot answer. How do 2 girls vanish in daylight in towns where everyone knows everyone and leaves nothing behind but rumors, grief, and the uneasy feeling that something hungry once lived in the woods and might still be out there? Some stories end with closure. Unfortunately, this story ends with a door left open. your host, Tim Eubanks. Thank you for listening to the BucklesBerry Lemonade podcast. And until next time, please remember to lock your doors, turn on your porch lights, hug a loved one, and stay safe out there.